There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They wear the camouflage of a Tuesday night or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, and they slip into the timeline of your memory without any fanfare. It's only later, when you trace the map of your own heart, that you find the pin marking the spot, the precise coordinate where the entire landscape of your world began to shift, silently and irrevocably, beneath your feet. For me, that moment was the sound of a key in the lock, followed by the specific weight of Julian's sigh as he dropped his gym bag by the door. It was a sound I knew better than my own breathing, a punctuation mark at the end of a long day. But on this night, it was different. On this night, it was the beginning of the end of the world I had so carefully constructed. He didn't say anything at first. He just drifted into the living room, a ghost illuminated by the pale, flickering blue of the muted television. I was on the couch, sketchbook open on my lap, but pencil still, having long since abandoned the pretense of drawing. I was waiting. I was always waiting, it seemed. He stood there for a long moment, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the city lights filtering through the window, a statue of exhaustion. The air between us was thick with things unsaid, a familiar pressure that had been building for weeks, like the heavy, humid air before a thunderstorm. I could feel the barometric drop in my own chest. He finally moved, not towards his own room at the end of the hall, but towards me. He sank onto the far end of the couch, the cushions groaning in protest, and the space he occupied seemed to pull all the light and air in the room towards him. He was a center of gravity, and I was a satellite caught in a decaying orbit. "Long day?" I asked, my voice a quiet intrusion into the shared silence. He just nodded, running a hand through his damp, dark hair. He smelled of chlorine and the crisp, clean scent of the soap he used, a smell so intrinsically him that my lungs sometimes ached with the familiarity of it. He leaned his head back against the cushions and closed his eyes. The lines of strain around them were etched deeper than usual. He was the captain of a nationally ranked swim team, a consultant for a software firm that demanded his soul in 60-hour increments, the guy everyone counted on for a ride, for a spot, for a solution. He was a pillar, and I had been watching the cracks begin to form in the marble for months. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, two separate islands in the quiet archipelago of our living room. My sketchbook felt heavy, my pencil a useless instrument. There was nothing to capture in this moment but the oppressive weight of the unspoken. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, to pry open the carefully sealed container of his exhaustion and let it all spill out. But that wasn't our way. I was the observer, the quiet harbor he returned to, not the interrogator. My role was to provide silence, a space for him to simply be, without the pressure of performance. I had perfected this role over 7 years of friendship, honing it into a fine art of supportive quietude. But lately, the silence felt different. It was no longer a comfortable blanket. It was a chasm, and I was terrified of falling into it. He shifted, a small movement that sent a tremor through the couch and directly into my bones. He curled onto his side, facing away from me, pulling his knees up slightly. A defensive posture, a retreat. And then, he did something that recalibrated the entire axis of our friendship. He reached back, his hand fumbling in the space between us, not looking at me, his fingers searching for something to hold on to. My heart seized in my chest, a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I knew what he was looking for. He was looking for an anchor. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that the anchor was me. My hand, of its own volition, lifted from my lap. It moved through the charged air, a slow, deliberate journey across the continental divide of a sofa cushion. My fingers brushed against his. His were cold from the autumn night, mine were warm. He didn't flinch. Instead, his fingers curled around mine, a desperate, unconscious grip, like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. He laced his fingers through mine, his thumb pressing into my palm, and then he was still. His breathing deepened, evening out into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. And there I was, anchored, tethered to the sleeping form of my best friend, the man I had been quietly, hopelessly in love with since we were 19 years old. The television played on, a silent parade of ghosts and colors, but I saw none of it. All of my senses were focused on the point of contact between our hands. I could feel the calluses on his palm from the pull-up bar, the slight chill of his skin, the faint, steady pulse in his wrist that beat a counter-rhythm to the frantic drumming in my own chest. This was the moment. This was the disguised, ordinary Tuesday night that was, in fact, the most extraordinary moment of my life. It was a question asked without words, and I had answered it without a voice. And I sat there, in the flickering blue light, terrified of what would happen when he woke up and realized what he had done. Our story, like most worth telling, didn't begin with a seismic event, but with a slow, tectonic drift. We met in the chlorinated haze of the university natatorium. I was a diver, all quiet precision and coiled energy, more comfortable with the silent fall through the air than with the boisterous camaraderie of the locker room. He was Julian, just Julian, the sun around which the entire swim team orbited. He was the freestyle anchor, a churning, powerful force of nature in the water, and a loud, laughing, effortlessly charismatic leader on the deck. He was everything I was not. He moved through the world with an easy confidence that I could only ever hope to photograph from a distance. Our friendship was an anomaly, a strange and unlikely equation that somehow balanced. He saw, I think, a quiet space in me, a refuge from the constant demands on his energy. He would find me after practice, stretched out on the cold tiles of the empty spectator stands, and just sit with me. He wouldn't always talk. Sometimes he would just lie on his back, staring up at the steel girders of the ceiling, his chest rising and falling as he recovered from a grueling workout. In those moments, I would study the lines of his face, the way a stray drop of water would trace a path from his temple down his jaw, the surprising length of his eyelashes, dark and wet against his skin. I was a photographer even then, before I ever owned a proper camera, collecting moments and filing them away in the quiet darkroom of my mind. He, in turn, became my protector. He deflected the good-natured but overwhelming teasing from the other guys on the team. He made sure I was included, but never forced into the spotlight. He seemed to understand, without me ever having to explain, that I operated on a different frequency. He learned to read my silences, to understand the subtle shift in my posture that meant I was done for the day, that my social battery had been depleted. "Leo's heading out," he'd announced to the group, throwing a casual arm around my shoulders. "Gotta go develop some quiet thoughts," and they would laugh, but they would let me go. That arm around my shoulders was a shield, a passport out of a world I didn't quite belong to, and into the one I curated for myself. The love I felt for him grew in that protected space. It was a hardy, shade-loving plant, thriving in the low light of unspoken affection and plausible deniability. I watched him date a string of bright, bubbly girls who matched his energy, who could keep up with his relentless pace. I listened to him talk about them, about first dates and awkward moments and fledgling feelings. I became an expert cartographer of his romantic life, mapping out his heartbreaks and his infatuations, all while my own feelings remained a vast, uncharted territory on the map of our friendship. It was a peculiar kind of torture to be his closest confidant, the keeper of his secrets, while my most important secret remained locked away inside of me. To tell him would have been to risk everything, to shatter the delicate ecosystem of our bond. So I said nothing. I became a vault. After graduation, moving in together felt like the most natural thing in the world. He was starting his consulting job, and I was trying to make a go of it as a freelance photographer. We found a small, two-bedroom apartment with good light and thin walls. Our lives braided together in the mundane details of domesticity. We learned the rhythm of each other's mornings, his a frantic whirlwind of protein shakes and misplaced keys, mine a slow, quiet ritual of coffee and contemplation. We learned that I couldn't stand dirty dishes in the sink, and he couldn't stand the television volume on an odd number. We built a life in that apartment, a comfortable, platonic partnership that was the bedrock of my existence. He was the one constant, the North Star in the often unpredictable sky of my freelance career. He was home. And for 3 years, it was enough. I had my work, my quiet routines, and I had Julian. I had his laughter echoing down the hall, the sound of his music through his bedroom door, the easy camaraderie of our late-night talks in the living room. I told myself that this was more than most people ever got. To have a friend who understood you so completely, who saw you and accepted you without question, that was a rare and precious gift. The love I felt for him was a low, steady hum beneath the surface of my life, a baseline frequency that I had learned to live with. I had accepted it, made peace with it. It was a part of me, like the color of my eyes or the shape of my hands. It just was. The shift began subtly, a change in the atmospheric pressure that only I seemed to notice. It started when Chloe, his girlfriend of 2 years, broke up with him. It wasn't a dramatic, explosive ending, but a slow, sad erosion. He told me about it one evening, sitting at our small kitchen table, pushing a stray breadcrumb around with his finger. He said she felt they were on different paths, that he was always working, always training, always on, and she needed someone who knew how to be off. He delivered the news with a strange detachment, his voice flat and emotionless, as if he were reporting on the quarterly earnings of a company he had no stake in. But I saw the truth in the hollows under his eyes, in the way his relentless energy seemed to bank and sputter like a dying fire. The breakup didn't just leave him single, it left him unmoored. Chloe had been his social anchor, the one who organized his calendar, who remembered his mother's birthday, who dragged him to parties and dinners. Without her, his world, which had always seemed so vast and full of people, suddenly shrank to the dimensions of our apartment. He stopped going out. He threw himself into work and training with a frightening intensity, as if he could outrun the emptiness that was chasing him. But at night, it always caught up. That was when the geography of our apartment began to change. His bedroom, once his private sanctuary, became a place he seemed to avoid. He started spending all his time in the common areas, a restless phantom haunting the living room. He'd be there when I went to bed, and he'd be there when I woke up, asleep on the couch, his laptop open on the coffee table, a half-empty mug of tea beside it. At first, I thought it was just a temporary phase, a byproduct of his grief and exhaustion. I'd find a blanket and cover him, turn off the lights, and retreat to my own room, my heart aching with a helpless, protective instinct. But the phase didn't end. It solidified into a new reality. He was lonely. It was a stark, simple truth that he would never admit, but I could see it in the way he lingered in the kitchen while I cooked, asking pointless questions just to keep the conversation going. I could hear it in the way he'd call my name from the living room. "Leo, come watch this." His voice laced with a desperate need for connection that he tried to disguise as casual boredom. The pillar was crumbling, and he was reaching for something to hold on to in the dust. He was reaching for me. And so began the ritual, the unspoken, nocturnal migration that would redefine the boundaries of our friendship and push my carefully constructed self-control to its absolute limit. The ritual began on the couch. It was our neutral ground, a demilitarized zone in the quiet war of unspoken feelings. It started with him asking me to stay. "Don't go yet," he'd murmur, his eyes already half closed as a movie played out its final, predictable scenes on the television. "Just stay till the end," and I would stay. I would sit on my end of the couch, rigid and hyper-aware, my entire nervous system attuned to the sound of his breathing across the cushions. I would watch the slow surrender of his consciousness, the way his body would finally, fully relax into sleep, and only then would I allow myself to move, to slip away to my own bed, my own lonely silence. But soon, that wasn't enough for him. The space between us on the couch became a tangible presence, a void he seemed compelled to fill. He would shift in his sleep, his long legs stretching out until his feet brushed against my thigh. The first time it happened, a jolt of pure electricity shot through me, so intense it was almost painful. I froze, convinced he would wake up, that he would feel the sudden tension in my body and pull away, embarrassed. But he didn't. He just sighed, a soft, contented sound, and settled deeper into sleep. The casual, accidental touch became a new fixture in our nightly routine. his foot resting against my leg, an innocent point of contact that felt as significant and as charged as a kiss. I began to live for these moments, and to dread them in equal measure. My days became a long, anxious prelude to the night. I would go through the motions of my life, editing photos, meeting with clients, going for long, solitary walks, but my mind was always somewhere else. It was in the living room, in the dim blue light of the television, waiting for the moment when Julian's exhaustion would finally win, and he would grant me this small, ambiguous piece of himself. I was an addict, and his unconscious touch was my drug. It was a dangerous game, this careful dance of proximity and denial. I was dissecting his every movement, every sigh, every sleepy murmur, searching for meaning, for a sign that this was more than just the desperate act of a lonely man seeking warmth. I was a detective searching for clues in a case where I was the only suspect. Then, one night, he crossed a new border. He had fallen asleep on the couch as usual, and I was preparing to make my usual quiet escape. But as I started to stand, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His eyes were closed, but his grip was firm. "Don't," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Stay." It wasn't a request this time. It was a plea. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sank back down onto the couch, my mind racing. What did this mean? Was he awake? Did he know what he was asking? I didn't dare speak, didn't dare breathe. He tugged gently on my wrist, and I, powerless to resist, shifted closer. He let go of my wrist and rolled onto his side, facing me. He threw an arm over my waist, pulling me against his chest, and buried his face in the crook of my neck. And that was it. The world stopped turning. I was rigid in his arms, every muscle in my body screaming. He was warm, so warm, and he smelled of sleep and clean laundry and that uniquely Julian scent that was my own private undoing. His breath was a soft, steady puff against my skin. I could feel the slow, powerful beat of his heart against my back. It was a steady, rhythmic thrum, a stark contrast to the chaotic arrhythmia of my own. I lay there, trapped and liberated all at once, for what felt like hours. I was terrified of moving, of waking him, of shattering this fragile, impossible moment. I was convinced that if he woke up and found himself holding me like this, he would recoil in horror and confusion, and our friendship would be damaged beyond repair. But he didn't wake up. He just held on tighter, as if he were afraid I might drift away in the night. This became the new ritual. The couch became our bed. We would fall asleep to the drone of the television, tangled together in a way that defied any platonic definition. My carefully constructed walls were being dismantled, brick by brick, by a man who was, for all intents and purposes, completely unconscious. It was a sweet and exquisite form of torture. During the day, we would revert to our old roles. We were just Leo and Julian, roommates, best friends. We'd talk about work, about the swim team, about the leaking faucet in the bathroom. We never mentioned the nights. We never acknowledged the fact that we were spending our nights wrapped in each other's arms. It was a silent, unspoken agreement, a secret we were keeping, even from ourselves. I existed in a state of perpetual, heightened awareness. My life became a study in contrasts. The easy, platonic friendship of the daytime, and the charged, intimate silence of the night. I was living a double life within the confines of my own home. I documented it all with my photographer's eye. I noticed the way he had started leaving his bedroom door open at night, just a crack, as if issuing a silent invitation. I noticed the way his eyes would linger on me a moment too long in the mornings, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths before he would look away. I was collecting these moments, these fragments of evidence, trying to piece them together into a coherent picture. But the image was still blurry, out of focus. I didn't know if I was developing a photograph of a shared, burgeoning love, or simply a self-portrait of my own desperate hope. The final migration happened on a cold, rainy Thursday. The sound of the storm outside was a constant, percussive roar against the windows. Julian had come home late, soaked to the bone and shivering. He had lost a major client at work, and the weight of the failure was a visible burden on his shoulders. He skipped dinner, skipped the television, and went straight to his room. But an hour later, he appeared in the doorway of my bedroom. I was at my desk, editing photos, the only light in the room the warm glow of my monitor. He was just standing there, a silhouette in the dim hallway light, clutching a pillow. "Can't sleep," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The rain." It was the flimsiest of excuses. This was a man who could sleep through a freight train passing through our living room. My heart started its familiar, frantic rhythm. This was it. This was a new frontier. I swiveled in my chair to face him. "Okay," I said, my own voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. I waited. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to be the one to bridge it. He took a tentative step into the room. "Can I?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He just looked at my bed, a silent question in his eyes. My bed. Not the couch. My space. My sanctuary. This was a deliberate act, a conscious choice. He was awake. He was aware. And he was asking. I felt a wave of terror and a surge of something that felt dangerously like hope. This was no longer something that could be dismissed as a sleepy, unconscious act. This was a choice. And he was asking me to make a choice, too. I could have said no. I could have protected myself, maintained the final, most important boundary between us. I could have pointed him back to the couch, back to the safety of plausible deniability. But I didn't. I looked at him, at the exhaustion and vulnerability in his face, at the way he was clutching that pillow like a lifeline, and I knew that I was long past the point of self-preservation. I had been adrift on this ocean for years, and he was offering me a shore. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "Of course." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. He moved to the bed and slid under the covers on the far side, his back to me. He didn't try to touch me. He just lay there, a tense, still presence in the dark. I turned off my monitor and climbed into bed beside him, my body rigid, my mind screaming. The storm raged outside, a perfect, pathetic fallacy for the tempest inside me. We lay there for a long time, two bodies in one bed, separated by a chasm of unspoken words. And then, I felt the bed shift. He rolled over to face me. In the darkness, I could just make out the shape of him, the gleam of his eyes. And I knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that he was not going to sleep. The air in the room was electric, thick with a tension so profound it felt like I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and sharp like ozone after a lightning strike. The sound of the rain against the window was a frantic, drumming heartbeat that seemed to echo the one in my own chest. We lay facing each other in the near darkness, a foot of space between us that felt both as wide as an ocean and as thin as a single sheet of paper. I could see the faint outline of his face, the dark slash of his eyebrows, the way his eyes seemed to capture and hold what little light filtered in from the street lamp outside. He was watching me. I could feel the weight of his gaze, an almost physical pressure against my skin. He was awake. He was utterly, completely awake. And in that moment, the entire artifice of our nightly ritual, the carefully constructed narrative of unconscious comfort-seeking, crumbled into dust. This was real. This was intentional. And I had no idea what came next. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of fear and hope. Years of carefully suppressed longing were surging to the surface, threatening to drown me. I was terrified that I had misread everything, that this was just another, deeper level of his loneliness, and that I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but my throat was tight, my tongue a useless weight in my mouth. What could I even say? "What are we doing, Julian?" The question felt both ridiculously simple and impossibly complex. It was the only question that mattered, and the one I was most afraid to ask. So I remained silent, a statue carved from anxiety, waiting for him to make the next move, to define the space we now occupied. He was the one who broke the silence. His voice, when it came, was a raw, hesitant whisper that was nearly lost in the sound of the storm. "Leo," just my name. But the way he said it, freighted with a universe of uncertainty, sent a shiver down my spine. I managed to find my own voice, though it came out as a strangled croak. "Yeah." He was silent for another long moment. I could hear him swallow, a small, nervous sound in the darkness. He was afraid. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Julian, the fearless team captain, the confident consultant, the man who moved through the world as if he owned it, was afraid. And he was afraid of me. Or rather, he was afraid of this, of whatever this was that existed between us in the dark. He shifted, moving a fraction of an inch closer. The air between us crackled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what?" I asked, my own whisper equally fragile. "For this," he said, a vague gesture that encompassed the bed, the room, the last several months of our lives. "For leaning on you so much. For being a mess." "You're not a mess," I said, the words automatic, a reflex of my long-standing role as his protector. "You're just going through something." "No," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of its usual firmness. "It's more than that. I know it is. I haven't been fair to you." He paused, and then he delivered the line that simultaneously shattered my heart and gave me a terrifying glimpse of hope. "It's not just comfort, Leo. Not anymore. I don't think it ever was." My breath caught in my throat. The image in the darkroom was finally starting to resolve. The blurry shapes were gaining edges, becoming clear. He was saying the things I had only ever dared to think. He was giving voice to the secret I had carried alone for so long. He moved again, closing the remaining distance between us. His knee brushed against mine under the covers. The contact was a spark that lit a fire in my veins. He lifted a hand, his fingers hesitating in the air for a moment before they came to rest gently on my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, a slow, tentative gesture of such profound tenderness that it brought tears to my eyes. His touch was a question, an apology, and a confession all at once. "I don't know what this is," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'm doing. All I know is that being near you is the only thing that makes sense lately. It's the only place I feel quiet." Quiet. He had chosen the one word that defined me, the very essence of what I had tried to be for him. He saw it. He understood it. He needed it. And in needing it, he needed me. My own hand came up to cover his, pressing his palm more firmly against my face. It was my answer. It was my surrender. It was my own confession, delivered in the silent language of touch that we had become so fluent in. He leaned in, his forehead coming to rest against mine. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and sweet. The world had shrunk to this single point of contact, to the space between our mouths. The tension was a living thing, a humming wire stretched to its breaking point. I could feel the tremor in his hand, the slight tremble of his body. He was waiting. He was giving me the choice, the final say. He had crossed the ocean, but he was waiting for me to let him onto the shore. And then he whispered the words that would become the new foundation of my world, a question so vulnerable, so stripped of all his usual bravado, that it undid me completely. "Would it be okay," he breathed, his lips brushing against mine as he spoke, "if I kissed you?" It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a confident seduction. It was a plea for permission. It was an admission of his own uncertainty, his own fear. He was laying himself bare, offering me all his confusion and all his need, and asking me to meet him there. In that moment, he was not the sun. He was just Julian, a man lost in the dark, asking for a light. And all the years of silence, all the carefully guarded feelings, all the fear of risking our friendship, it all dissolved in the face of that one, honest question. There was no other possible answer. There never had been. "Yes," I whispered. The aftermath was not the explosion of relief and certainty I had foolishly imagined. It was a deafening, crushing silence. I woke the next morning to an empty space beside me in the bed. The indentation of his head was still on the pillow, the sheets were still warm from his body, but Julian was gone. Not just from my bed, but from the apartment. I found a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter. "Early meeting. See you later." There was no mention of the night before. No acknowledgement of the kiss that had felt like a tectonic plate shifting beneath us. It was as if it had never happened. A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I had been wrong. I had misread everything. The kiss hadn't been a beginning. It had been a mistake. A moment of lonely, rain-soaked weakness on his part, and a moment of catastrophic hope on mine. The image in the darkroom had been a trick of the light, a chemical anomaly that had produced a beautiful, false picture. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from my chest to my face. I had let him see me. I had let him see the years of yearning in a single, whispered yes, and he had run. He didn't come home that night. A text message appeared on my phone around 10 o'clock. Crashing at Mark's place. Project is killing me. Mark was another guy from the team. The excuse was plausible, but I knew it was a lie. He was avoiding me. He was putting distance between us, creating a buffer zone around the radioactive fallout of our kiss. The apartment, which had once been my sanctuary, suddenly felt vast and hostile. Every empty room, every silent corner, echoed with his absence. The couch in the living room looked like a crime scene. I couldn't even look at my own bed without feeling a fresh wave of humiliation. The next few days were a masterclass in emotional torture. He was a ghost in our shared home. He would leave before I woke up and come back long after I had gone to bed. Our only communication was through terse, functional text messages about bills or groceries. He was building a wall between us, brick by painful brick of silence, and I was letting him. I retreated into myself, into the familiar, self-protective shell I had lived in for so long. I told myself it was for the best. We would pretend it never happened. We would go back to being friends. The hum of my love for him, which had crescendoed into a symphony, was now just a painful, ringing silence in my ears. But the pretense was impossible to maintain. The silence in the apartment wasn't the comfortable, companionable silence we had once shared. It was a toxic, suffocating void. The foundation of our friendship, which I had guarded so fiercely for so long, was fractured. The very thing I had been afraid of destroying by speaking my truth had been destroyed by his silence. And after a week of this silent, cold war, something inside me finally broke. I couldn't live like this. I couldn't live in the ruins of what we had been, haunted by the ghost of what we almost were. I deserved more than that. He deserved more than that. Our friendship, even if that's all it could be, deserved an honest death, not this slow, silent starvation. I waited for him. I sat on the couch, the same couch where this had all begun, and I waited. He came in just after midnight, moving through the dark apartment with a practiced quietness, assuming I would be asleep. When I flicked on the small lamp beside me, he froze in the hallway, caught in the sudden pool of light like a startled animal. He looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something else, something that looked like guilt. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the raging storm inside me. I had no anger left. I was just tired, so incredibly tired. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at a spot on the floor, his shoulders hunched. "Leo, I'm really tired. Can we do this tomorrow?" "No," I said, the word sharper than I intended. "We're going to do this now. Sit down, Julian." For a moment, I thought he would refuse, that he would just turn and walk away, retreating to the safety of his room. But then, with a long, defeated sigh, he came into the living room and sank into the armchair across from me, creating a deliberate, defensible distance between us. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "What are you so afraid of?" I asked, my voice soft again. He flinched, the question hitting its mark. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure, unadulterated weariness. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I said, a warning note creeping into my tone. "Don't lie to me. Not after everything. You kiss me. You tell me that being near me is the only thing that makes sense, and then you disappear. You treat me like a stranger in our own home. You hide from me. So I'm asking you again, what are you so afraid of?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, frantic panic that stole my breath. It was the look of a trapped man. "I can't do this, Leo," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can't be that." "Be what?" I pushed, my heart aching for him, for his obvious pain, but knowing that we couldn't stop now. We had to go all the way through it. "Be what, Julian? Say the word." He shook his head, looking away again. "You don't understand. My whole life, everyone sees me a certain way. My family, the team, everyone. I'm the guy they count on. The captain. The straight 1 inch. He spat the last word out like it was poison. That's who I am. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about me. This wasn't about his feelings for me, or the lack thereof. This was about him. This was about the carefully constructed identity he had built for himself, the role he had been playing for his entire life. Our kiss hadn't just been a kiss. It had been an earthquake that had shattered the foundations of that identity. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. A wave of empathy, so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me, washed away the last vestiges of my hurt. I saw him then, not as the sun, not as the pillar, but as a young man who was terrified of the truth. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, forcing him to look at me again. Who you are, I said, my voice low and intense, is the man who came into my room in the middle of a storm because you couldn't sleep. Who you are is the man who held my hand on this couch because you needed an anchor. Who you are is the man who asked, so gently, if you could kiss me. That's who you are, Julian. Everything else is just a costume. Tears welled in his eyes, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. They traced paths down his tired face. I'm so confused, he choked out, the words a raw, painful admission. When Chloe left, I felt nothing. I was supposed to be devastated, but I just felt empty. And then, with you, all these months, it was the only time I didn't feel empty. It was the only time I felt anything. And it scares the hell out of me, Leo. Because I liked it. I liked holding you. I liked kissing you. God, I wanted to kiss you for so long, and I didn't even know it. His confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, shimmering thing. He had said it. He had finally admitted it, to me and to himself. The wall he had built came crashing down, and in its place was just the raw, vulnerable truth of his heart. He wasn't running because he didn't feel it. He was running because he did. I stood up and walked over to the armchair where he sat, a mess of tears and confusion. I knelt on the floor in front of him, so we were at eye level. I took his hands in mine. They were trembling. Hey, I said softly. Look at me. He lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and lost. You don't have to have it all figured out, I told him, my thumbs stroking the backs of his hands. You don't have to have a label for it. You don't have to be anything for anyone else. You just have to be here, with me, and not be afraid. Can you do that? Can you just stop running? He stared at me, his gaze searching my face, and for the first time since that night, I let him see everything. I let him see the years of love, the patience, the unwavering certainty of my own heart. I showed him that he was safe here, that this space between us was not a place of judgment or expectation, but a harbor. A long, shuddering sob escaped him, and he leaned forward, his forehead resting against mine, our hands still clasped between us. I'm sorry, he wept. I'm so sorry, Leo. I was so scared. I know. I whispered, my own tears starting to fall. I know, but you're not alone in it. And in that small, lamplit living room, surrounded by the ruins of our old friendship, we began to build something new, something honest, something real. It wasn't a neat and tidy resolution. It was the start of a messy, complicated, and beautiful conversation that would last for hours, for days, for the rest of our lives. But it was a start. He had stopped running. He had come home. The conversation that started that night didn't truly end for a long time. It bled into the following days, unfolding in quiet moments in the kitchen over coffee, in whispered confessions in the dark of my room, in long, silent walks through the city. We dismantled the identities we had built, for ourselves and for each other. He was not just the confident captain, and I was not just the quiet observer. We were two people who had found a rare and profound connection, a gravitational pull that had finally, after years of orbiting, brought us together. He talked about the pressure he'd always felt, the suffocating weight of expectation from his father, his coaches, his friends. He confessed that his relationship with Chloe had felt like playing a part, saying the right lines, making the right moves, but never truly feeling connected. He had been living a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt hollow inside. And I, in turn, told him everything. I told him about the diver on the 10-meter board, 19 years old, watching the charismatic swimmer on the blocks below and feeling a terrifying, exhilarating flip in his stomach that had nothing to do with the dive he was about to perform. I told him about the years of watching him, of loving him in silence, of resigning myself to a friendship that was both my greatest joy and my most persistent sorrow. I laid my heart bare, showing him the secret territory I had mapped out and kept hidden for so long. And he listened, his eyes never leaving my face, his expression a mixture of wonder, regret, and a deep, soul-shaking tenderness. He was seeing me for the first time, not as his quiet, supportive roommate, but as someone who had loved him through everything, patiently and completely. A new normal began to settle over our apartment, as quiet and as gentle as a morning fog. The ambiguity that had charged the air for so long was replaced by a soft, warm certainty. The rituals of our friendship were not discarded, but transformed. We still watched movies on the couch, but now, when he reached for my hand, it was a deliberate, conscious act. When he leaned his head on my shoulder, it was an open expression of affection, not a sleepy accident. The plausible deniability was gone, and in its place was a beautiful, breathtaking honesty. The first time he came to my room after our talk, there was no pretext of a storm or a nightmare. He simply appeared at my door as I was getting ready for bed. He didn't say a word. He just opened his arms, and I walked into them. He held me for a long time, his arms wrapped tightly around me, his chin resting on the top of my head. It was an embrace that said everything we were still learning how to put into words. It said, "I'm here. I'm not running. This is real." That night, when we got into my bed, he pulled the covers over us, and then, with a quiet deliberation that made my heart ache, he reached over and closed my bedroom door. Not just ajar. Not halfway. He closed it completely, the soft click of the latch a definitive, resounding statement. This space was ours now. Private. Sacred. There was no need for escape routes. We learned a new language together, a vocabulary of touch and quiet intimacy. We discovered that a kiss could be a question, a statement, or a promise. A hand on the small of his back as we passed in the narrow hallway was a sentence. The way he would find my foot with his under the kitchen table was a paragraph. We were creating our own lexicon of love, written in a language that only the two of us could understand. My life, which had once been a series of still photographs, static moments of observation, was suddenly a moving picture, a film unfolding in real time. And I was no longer just the photographer. I was in the frame with him. There were still moments of fear, of uncertainty. We were navigating a new and unfamiliar landscape without a map. One afternoon, he came home looking pale and shaken. His father had called, asking if he was bringing a date to his cousin's upcoming wedding, casually mentioning a girl from their hometown. The old pressures, the old expectations, were still there, waiting in the wings. Julian sat on the edge of the couch, his head in his hands, and for a moment, I saw the old panic flicker in his eyes. I sat down next to him, not saying anything, and just laid my hand on his back, a steady, warm pressure. He leaned into my touch, taking a long, shuddering breath. He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and held on tight. He didn't need to say anything. I understood. We were in this together. We were each other's anchor now, and the storms of the outside world couldn't break us. The final piece of the puzzle, the final resolution of the image, came on a quiet Sunday morning a few months later. I woke to the smell of coffee and the soft morning light filtering through my window. Julian was already up, a rare occurrence. I found him in the kitchen, standing by the window, a mug in his hands, looking out at the city waking up below. He was wearing one of my old, soft t-shirts and a pair of his own sweatpants. He looked so at home, so perfectly, wonderfully in place, that the sight of him stole my breath. He heard me and turned, a slow, easy smile spreading across his face. It was a smile I had seen 1,000 times before, but now, it was just for me. It held none of the performative charm he used on the rest of the world. It was quiet, and it was real. "Morning," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble. "Morning," I replied, walking over to him. He handed me the mug he was holding. It was my favorite one, the slightly chipped ceramic one I'd had since college. He had made my coffee exactly how I liked it, with a splash of milk and no sugar. He knew. Of course, he knew. He had been paying attention all along, even when he didn't know why. I took a sip, the warmth spreading through my chest. He didn't move away. He just stood there, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of my hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my skin for a moment. It was a small, domestic gesture, an act of such simple, profound intimacy that it felt more significant than any grand declaration. This was our life now. This was the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, slow kiss that tasted of coffee and the promise of 1,000 more mornings just like this one. It wasn't a kiss of desperate need or confused longing. It was a kiss of peace, of certainty. It was the kiss of a man who was finally, truly home. We are not built in a day. We are assembled over a lifetime, piece by piece, from the moments that shape us, the choices that define us, and the people who teach us who we are. Sometimes, the most important structures in our lives are the ones we build in the quiet, in the dark, without a blueprint. They are built on a foundation of unspoken understanding, mortared with shared silence and late-night confessions. They are not always perfect or planned, but they are strong because they are built not on what we thought we should be, but on who we truly are. He was my unexpected architecture, the home I didn't know I was building, and I was his. And in the quiet rooms of the life we made, we finally learned the beautiful, simple truth that love is not about finding the perfect person, but about finding the one person with whom you can finally, safely, be yourself.